Welcome, everybody. Chris Snook, and we are kicking off day 2 with one of our commercialization partnerships, and a man who needs no introduction. If you're in crypto, you need no introduction to this man, Charles Hoskinson from IOG and Cardano. Charles, welcome to Inevitable World Summit. We're super excited to see you, sir.
Chris, it's so good to be on here. Thank you so much for having us.
You know, it's a little colder where you are, a little warmer where I am than last time we saw each other in Wyoming. But I got my Wyoming hat on, so we're feeling that. So, in warm, sunny Colorado, as you say often. Today,
warm, sunny Colorado, always warm, always sunny.
Yeah, you've had a hell of a week because we are right in the thick of Merry Hard Fork, and congrats on that. I know for a lot of folks that this may be the first introduction to you. It's probably good to kind of give them the quick and dirty. How did we get here, right? Like, how did Charles get here? What was that path? And then just where is Cardano? Because a lot of the audience here is influencers, they're brands, they're micropreneurs. A lot of them are crypto investors, but a lot of them, quite frankly, are the users that we want, the mass adoption that we need and want to scale these
right.
services that you're working so hard to provide infrastructure for. So let's just start with kind of the quick and dirty on that, kind of the path to today, and then we'll get into like Merry Hard Fork, and we'll get into some other stuff.
Well, how close to bedrock do you want me to get? Because I can go all the way back to the beginning, or we can.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is you come at this from a very unique perspective related to kind of your. I always think so anyway. Related to your kind of professorship kind of path at one point. So maybe kind of start there and then kind of morph into how you became the CEO and chairman of a $30 billion infrastructure as of, I think, today or yesterday or whatever day.
Yeah. Well, I found this golden ticket. Willy Wonka invited me to a factory, and I survived that death trap, and he just gave it to me. No. So let's start from the beginning. I was asked earlier today, I spoke to a students group in Scotland, and they said, like, what really inspired you to want to go change the world, be part of a cryptocurrency space, and to do something so crazy? And I said, there were 3 things that were very formative in my life. And they kind of created a situation where there was no other option but to do something like this. And if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, if you want to actually go out and do something, you have to have some fanatical, traumatic thing that makes everything else in life be unacceptable unless you go and do it. It's almost like David Goggins. He has to jog. If he doesn't do it, like some detonator will go off and kill him. He's a fanatic. Right. So, for me, first, I remember reading about Norman Borlaug. Did you ever, anything about him? Did you ever hear of him?
No, and I love when I learn about someone I should have read that I don't know. I don't know Norman Borlaug.
Yeah, and actually, the fact that you don't know about him is a great proof to the point. Norman had a bigger impact on the world than Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or a U.S. president or any other person in the 20th century. He saved 1 billion people. And how he did that was he was an expert in agricultural tech, and he just went around the world and taught people farming practices and gave them fertilizer and showed them how to use it. And over a period of time, like long period of time, those upgrades prevented 1 billion people from starving to death. So when I first read his story, I was just like, wow, some random guy I've never heard about, just by sharing knowledge, one person can impact an entire 1 billion people. That's just absolutely incredible. And then I used to live in Virginia years ago, and I remember I used to eat at this restaurant all the time, and the gal was a waitress, and I remember when her husband came on, and they started talking to each other in Spanish. She had tears in his eyes. So I asked her what happened, and she said, well, my husband's a drywaller, and he had just been paid for a big job. The police pulled him over. They took his money. It's civil asset forfeiture. You just take the money. I said, they arrest him? No. Any charges? No, they said it was drug money. And he was trying to explain to them it's cash payment for drywall. And I just was blown away. I thought, that can't happen. This is America. This is theft. But, he's a legal immigrant, and as a consequence, he didn't want to really rock the boat, so he couldn't fight it. So they just let it go. The police stole his money and they let it go. And the officer knew damn well it wasn't drug money. But and that taught me that people aren't evil for being evil. They're evil because systems are unjust. If systems poorly designed, it enables people to go do things. So don't rely on don't be evil, rely on can't be evil. How do you build systems and institutions that have properties that give you the outcomes you want? And then the final event was the election of Obama. I was a Ron Paul guy, and I hated Bush. I hated all the things that had happened. The Iraq War happened, and and I was like, wow, the government lied to us. This is horrible. And then Obama comes, and he's totally new dude. No connections to the past. He's completely fresh. And I was so excited. I said, finally, Wall Street's going to get what's coming to him. All these banksters, this supermajority in the Senate and Congress. It's a unique moment in history where people are going to come together and drain the swamp and clean stuff up. And then the swamp creatures took over the swamp house. And Obama didn't put anybody in jail. These guys all got away with $100 million bonuses, $200 million bonuses. So once I had these formative experiences, I was left in a position where I didn't trust institutions. I realized that a single person had the power to change institutions. And I realized that if you design the new institutions in just the right way, you go from won't be evil to can't be evil. The system will actually be good. So that was kind of a perfect storm to get involved in the cryptocurrency space, because the kind of the tagline of cryptocurrency is exactly that. Don't trust people, trust the code. These are global protocols, and if people adopt them, we're all treated equally. We all have the same rules, for better or for worse. The problem is I didn't know anybody. I'd studied mathematics, and I'm not exactly, at that time, I wasn't exactly a known entrepreneur. Like, who the hell would give me money? So I asked a professor of mine, I said, what should I do? And he said, well, if you're really serious about it, those who can't do, teach. So go teach some people. Like, you're a smart guy, learn how all this stuff works, create a class, give it away for free, and see what happens with it. I said, sure. My dad thought I was crazy. He's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm just going to drop out of everything. I'm not going to go get that PhD, screw life. I'm going to go instead to go teach this free course. And he's like, yeah, you got to charge for it though. It's like, no, I'm going to give it away for free. I give this away, good things will come. And he's like, but how do you make money from that? I don't understand. I said, Dad, I don't know. Right. I have no idea, but we'll figure this out. And so there was a brief period.
2012-ish?
That was 2013. That was 2013.
Oh, that was 13. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Right when crypto started getting hot. And so I created this course, Bitcoin or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And I got 70,000 students in a very short period of time. And then one of those students was this really weird but nice Chinese guy named Li Xiaolao. And he sends me a message, says, I like the cut of your jib. I want to give you some money to start a business. And I'm here thinking this is a Nigerian prince scam. This is not real. Yeah. And it's like, no, I'm serious. I want to give you $500,000 to go start something. And I was like, what? He's like, you're a smart guy. You'll figure it out. I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I created a thread on Bitcoin Talk, because that's where we used to talk to each other back in the day. And the thread title was Project Invictus. And I said, okay, what could we do to make the cryptocurrency space undefeatable? Because that's basically what Invictus is about. Right. And there was a bimodal distribution of answers. Half the people said we need value stability, because then we could be a payment system and a unit of account. The other people said exchanges are an existential problem, because everybody was worried about Mt. Gox at the time, and rightfully so. So we need a decentralized exchange. So the very first person to reply on that thread was, of all people, Dan Larimer. He had the little handle Bytemaster. And Dan said, I have this crazy idea called BitShares that does both of those things. And I said, okay, let's talk about it. So I flew out to Virginia. I spent some time with Dan, because I live in Colorado at the time. I went back to Virginia. I spent some time with Dan. I said, all right, let's try it out. So Dan and I created a company. It was called Invictus Innovations. And I loved his dad. Dan, on the other hand, we didn't quite see eye to eye on business strategy. We fought and fought and fought and fought. And there was 2 Larimers, 1 Hoskinson. So I said, okay, I'll take a buyout and go do something else with my life. So I took a buyout after just a few months, and he went on, did BitShares and Angel Shares and all that stuff. And I was kind of homeless. So then I met Vitalik Buterin and Anthony Diorio. And I knew Anthony through an education initiative I was doing with the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada. And he introduced me to Vitalik. And he said, there's this crazy idea called Ethereum. Can you read the white paper? So I read the white paper. I said, well, it's interesting. What do you want to do with it? He said, well, I don't know. Let's meet up in Miami and figure it out. So in January of 2014, we met in Miami. And then there's lots of books written and podcasts and other things about what happened next. We started Ethereum. It went to the moon. I left in June of that year because, again, there was a huge disagreement about strategy, vision, and purpose. And the social dynamics were not friendly. The relationships really devolved. And that's what always happens when you have 8 founders. It just can't work. There has to be a consolidation somewhere. So then I was 0-2, and I was like, man, maybe this whole crypto thing is not for me. I've done all this stuff, and I'm not looking so good. So it's kind of like my capstone. I got invited to go to Bermuda for a TED Talk. And I said, all right, I'm going to go tell people what crypto is all about, how I feel crypto should be done. And I'm going to be done with it. I'm just going to retire, and I'm going to go do something else with life. I'm a terrible entrepreneur. I don't know what I'm doing. And obviously, there's other people far more qualified than me to go and do this. So I went and did this whole TED Talk in October of 2014. And it got a very good reception. And then some guys in Japan reached out to me, and along with my former secretary from when I was at Ethereum, and said, hey, we want to do Ethereum too, like the Ethereum of Japan. Do you want to go for it? And I said, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it on my terms. Here's what we're going to do. Peer review and formal methods. It's going to take 5 years and rah, rah, rah. There's like, no, but we want it all done in 6 months. I said, no, it's going to take 5 years. You can do this and that. It's like, you're crazy, man. I said, well, take it or leave it. They said, all right, we'll take it. So, okay, I'll go to Japan. So I went and lived in Osaka in early 2015, and I set up a company in Hong Kong, and I basically started building.
That was the Emergo guys?
No, that was the Emergo guys, yeah. And I started, it was actually proto-Emergo. So those were like a group of people who had invested in XRP and in Bitcoin, and they made a lot of money from that. And then they had bought Ether, and they were like, well, what's the next big thing? And so then they later on created Emergo on the back of that. Okay. And so we just did a joint venture, and I did the science and the tech, and they did a lot of the initial business, and we set up the Cardano Foundation to take care of the actual foundation stuff. And it grew like a weed. And, now 2021, it's a $30 billion ecosystem, give or take. And we have hundreds of thousands of people in it. We're at 95 academic papers, about 10,000 citations, 4 research centers. I run a company that's profitable, 300 people, multiple product lines. We do all kinds of things, services, products, infrastructure, consulting. We work with nation states like country of Georgia, country of Ethiopia. I've been to 52 countries. And it's just been a wild ride. So, if you ever watch Prometheus, where he says, like, those big things have small beginnings, David was not lying. I could not believe it was just a free class that I gave away, inspired by getting disgruntled with the way the world was working and crazy enough to believe I could do something, got me to where I am today.
And yeah, I mean, that's a phenomenal background. And I think where we emerge from matters, because a lot of times, you said a couple things I want to unpack and then hear you vamp on. So one of them is, I haven't heard of that author, and now I want to go look him up. And a lot of it's because I've been kind of a big kind of curiosity seeker around biomimetics and for quite some time, biomimicry and like nature's designs, right? The design theories of nature and all that stuff. And part of it's just the pragmatism that Mother Nature always wins. And you may not like how she wins, but she always wins, right? If that means a fire in California, or if that means drought somewhere, right? Yeah. She's resetting the systems. And, and hopefully humanity will get some more things right than we get wrong over the next decade or 20. And we will be around to see her as she wins the next time, because we might be the ones that get wiped out if we keep heading down the path we are. But when you think about that just in a construct, you realize that nature is inherently a mix of interoperability between centralized systems, i.e. the sun, and whatever, feeding 9 planets and ours with a specific right combination for atmospheric pressure and all that. And then decentralized systems, like I cut myself shaving, and on a peer-to-peer level, I have cells doing that, but the rest of my body doesn't shut down or go into shock, right? And
right.
So on the lowest level of things, we have peer-to-peer, and then as we aggregate up, we get these different mixes of systems. And I'm curious because I don't know how many other peer-reviewed papers other protocols have done. I do believe 95 is exponentially, or at least a statistically significant more than a lot of the other things that are out there. And that doesn't necessarily make things right or wrong. It just means that the thoughtful approach and really trying to understand the desired consequences of your design, as well as the unintended consequences and those incentives that may or may not mesh up, right, to ultimately solve the problem that catalyzed you into this space. There's been a lot of thoughtful approach around it, a scientific rigor that I think is part of what makes you guys unique. At least that's why we're partnered with you. I don't know if that's how everybody else thinks, but
Right. Well, yeah. So let's talk about peer review. First off, if you're an academic from a different domain, like physics or math or biology or whatever, any of these hard sciences, that's not computer science. You have to understand that peer review works a little differently in computer science land. So normally, for proper old school academics, peer review is you write a paper, you go to a conference first, or some event, or you correspond with your colleagues. Eventually, you work up the courage to submit to a journal. You go through an incredibly long latency. It can take months, perhaps even years, depending upon the field and the journal, before you eventually survive the process and get published. So from start to beginning, you could be looking at like 3-4 semesters, 1 to 2 years for something to actually hit market. And then you go on the next thing, and you go on the next thing. You can publish a few things a year, but you don't publish 50 things a year or 100 things a year. So the peer review process is incredibly high latency, very short. In the computer science world, because it's a new field of science, and it's a blend of theory and applied with a heavy industrial component, and most of computer science was built after 1950 in a very different world than physics and mathematics or biology, which are much older fields of science. It's the opposite. Most peer reviews done at conferences. You get into a conference in the math world, they'll take a 1-page paper. And computer science land, you submit something to crypto, it only has 10% to 15% of papers submitted get accepted. And you're competing with Stanford and Harvard and Carnegie Mellon, major institutions. So the good news is, because it's a conference-driven system, you have lots of conferences, and they happen quite frequently. So you have a much shorter time in latency for peer review in the computer science world, because a common complaint we get is, peer review takes too long. You won't have a competitive advantage. You have to move fast to break things. We say, hey guys, either you're going to fix it on the front end or you're going to fix it on the back end. You're going to ship a junk protocol. You'll have a bunch of problems with it. And then you're going to spend the next 3 years managing the problems that you have until somehow you can replace it if you can. How much is that going to slow you down? Especially when you're trying to compete with the next generation. Or you could do all your homework, do it up front, get it done in 6 months, and you won't have that 3 years of problems that live on the tail. That's why Eth2 is taking forever. That's why Eth2 is so hard. That's why there's so many moving pieces to it. The upgrade is so brutal, because they didn't take the proper time to actually build Ethereum right to begin with. Because they had this move fast and break things mentality. And what's nice is that we're not the only science coin. The only ones that believe in period. You have very strong groups now. You have, for example, Emin Gunsier with Avalanche out of Cornell. He's a top academic in the United States, and they have a lot of great people on their team. You have Algorand over at MIT. Silvio Macaulay is a Turing Fellow, and he went and won the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, and he just gutted the IBM research group. I wish I could do that. He walked in, it's like, IBM, you guys are clowns. You should go work for me. And he got Craig Gentry and Tal Robin and all these amazing people. So there's some very strong academic coins where they have rigor, they go to conferences, they say reasonable things, they have real academics working for them, and they go through the peer review process. We were the first mover in that respect, but there's a tsunami wave of good research now. And the advantage of that is that research is self-reinforcing. Right. So we read each other's papers, we go to the same conferences, and as a consequence, we're able to borrow from each other. Macaulay had a real great way of generating random numbers. We say, hey, that VRF thing, let's enhance that. That's a good idea. Okay, and there's some things we've done, like Polkadot, for example, borrowed our consensus algorithm, Ouroboros Prowse. They upgraded it. They did it a few different parameterizations their way, but they started with a foundation with that design. So that's the advantage of writing things down in a rigorous way. And then for an outside party, a lot of people are like, well, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a computer guy. How the hell do I know it's right? Well, there's 2 ways. There's only 2 ways. Either it's faith or it's rigor. Faith is, I believe in that person. I think they're so smart, they're just going to figure it out. Rigor is, they submitted themselves to a process that validated the claims they made.
Right.
That's why we have the FDA for medicine. That's why we have audit and oversight. That's why you have somebody go and check someone's credentials. That's why you do due diligence, right? And so how do you do due diligence in science? By having independent scientists check the work and verify if the things you're saying are reasonable or not. Doesn't mean it's completely right. Just like audits don't capture fraud all the time, or sometimes there's something wrong with the organization. Similarly, sometimes even if people are checking it, the proof can be flawed. But it means that someone who doesn't have a financial incentive, who's totally independent of the project, has taken the time to read the papers, look at the math, check the proofs, and thinks that there's merit there, it's novel, and that it works.
Yeah.
That's a standard I think we should demand for anybody who's commanding market caps in the tens of billions of dollars.
And I appreciate the fact that, you've, as we've gotten to know each other a little bit more over the last, year or two, I've known of you for 3.5, 4 years, but it's really within the last year that I've gotten to get to actually spend some time with you. And there's kind of that moment where you just get a sense of someone's go to market as an individual, as a leader, as a person. And my sense of yours is that, you're very reasonable, thoughtful approach, and you're an ecosystem guy, right? And by that, I mean, not just your ecosystem, you ripped off names of 8 or 9 or 10 other protocols, right? And I think because the open source, right? It's one thing to say open source, or it's one thing to say, we're going to build this through collaboration. And then it's another thing to demonstrate it and not get sucked into these religious battles that, that juice price or hurt price or just mean nothing, right? At the end of the day, they don't solve any problem.
Right.
And so, I think you've weathered a lot of storms that way. You'll probably weather several more because as you get bigger, the storms will get bigger. But, I think to your credit, you're still open and still looking to put the rigor in for not just Cardano, but for the industry. And I appreciate that, from just an onlooker standpoint. Let's talk a little bit about, the big pink, beautiful, merry elephant in the room, right? Which is multi-asset ledger, native smart contracts, native decentralized ID that's portable. These kind of things that people are starting to understand what they are. But again, like all these innovations, they're not all cut from the same cloth, right? It's an open source protocol, but not all decentralized IDs are the same. Some are portable, some are not. Some are built with rigor, some are not. Some are on a blockchain that's not native. So walk us through kind of the design of that and where things sit today from what they enable in a unique way.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So multi-asset has been a story in the cryptocurrency space since before I joined the space, and long after I retire and I'm an old man in diapers with Alzheimer's. There's going to probably still be a multi-asset conversation. But the basic issue is that you have some guy who wakes up and says, I want to have a token associated with some concept or idea. It can be, I want to have a gold-backed coin. I want to do a loyalty point. I want to do a new currency. I want to do a stable coin, whatever the hell it is. They got a token. You have two choices. Either you build a completely new network, you build a network effect with it, you have to figure out a way to make it secure, you need a consensus protocol, or you embed that in another ledger. The question is, do you do that in a way when you embed it in another ledger where it's treated as a first-class citizen or it's something else? So in Ethereum, it's something else. When you create an ERC20 token, you're not a token, you're a smart contract that just so happens to create a token, but it's treated differently. It requires Ether as fuel, and it competes for resources with all the other smart contracts, regardless of what they are. When you treat it as a first-class citizen, what you're saying is, for that Ether or that Bitcoin or whatever your underlying unit account, the assets issued are treated the same way in the system. So whatever you can do with that asset, you can do it with the native asset. Now, this is not a new idea. In fact, the very first group of people that were thinking deeply about this were trying to do this on Bitcoin with the protocol called color coins. Way back in the day. That's OG, okay, before most people knew it. Because I knew about crypto since like 2011, and some of the first papers that I read were about color coins, okay, Manny Rosenfield and these other guys, so 10 years of history there. But the basic idea was that, okay, we're going to create this overlay protocol that will kind of color transactions and breach fungibility, and then by coloring them, you can create tokens with that. The problem is the system didn't understand them, So it was only kind of working one way, and you had to do a really complex overlay protocol. So we started from that concept, and we said, can we extend UTXO and the account model so that you can issue assets and the system treats it like ADA? Now, the advantage there is that you can pay the transaction fee eventually in ADA, in the native asset instead of ADA. And it also, all the stuff that ADA can do, like state channels and governance and all these other things, will eventually work with the native asset as well. Wow, that's just such an obvious thing. And if you build a great security model for storing and securing ADA, you can reuse that security model for any native asset that's issued on the system. So as the main network gets faster and more scalable and more feature rich, every asset issued on that network gets all those features for free, but they don't have to rebuild the network effect. They don't have to figure out how to be secure. It's just there and it just works. Okay, and then that's really the differentiator. ERC20, it's treated as something else, and it's competing with the resources of the system as a whole, and it'll never be able to pay transaction fees in the native asset. So when you issue your token, when people spend, either you're subsidizing it or the user has to spend Ether every time they transact. That's where they live.
Right, and you're subject to maybe price fluctuations in the cost of a gas or whatever the converter mechanism is, because I got to go out of the smart contract into something that can be booked to the single asset ledger and then back on the other side. And so I'm using and burning fuel, as you said, on each side. The thing that's funny about it to me, Charles, and I'm going to press a little bit because I know you can go deeper on this, but in a layman's term way, because you are a teacher at heart. What I heard you say is it's the beautiful simplicity, and yet for a lot of people, even people that have looked at this for a while, it's so hard to grasp because it's like, okay, so I understand Bitcoin rides on the Bitcoin blockchain. I understand Ether rides on the Ethereum blockchain. I understand ADA rides on the Cardano blockchain, but how's something going to get treated by ADA? I'm going to be out. So wait, so I could create Chris Coin and I could create a non-fungible token around Chris's identity, but then Chris Coin can have the same properties as ADA does? And
Exactly, because you just build it into the system. So you put into the ledger rules of the system that a transaction is valid if it carries a user-issued asset alongside if it carries ADA. So it's just that simple. You just have to make the system aware of it. If Bitcoin was aware of color coins, we probably wouldn't have Ethereum today.
Right.
Ethereum would be a Bitcoin-derived asset with a sidechain with an EVM. Because that's actually what Vitalik tried to do originally. He tried to actually have Ethereum be a piggyback protocol on Primecoin, which was a different cryptocurrency, and eventually it just wasn't tenable, so he created his own network. So that's basically it. It's like just make it turnkey, have a command where you issue a special minting transaction, you create an asset, and then that asset rides on the same rails, the same accounting system as ADA does, and has the same transaction mechanics, because it's just a parameter. And there's some metadata and other such things to make it all work. But those are implementation details. And actually, in just 7 days, we're going to have the Cardano 360 episode, where real time in the episode, we're going to create a token and show people how to do it. And
that's what I wanted to segue. I wanted to segue to that because one of the other things, again, back to this 5-year, I'm going to do it my way or not do it at all, and you're not going to hurt my feelings. I'll go do something else, right? That's kind of what you said in Japan several years ago. But it was like, if we do it my way, here's why my way needs to happen. 5 years, peer review, all this stuff. One of the things that was important to that was the language that you're building this in, right? And part of that is because when we talk about minting, there's certain requirements depending on how you're going to mint something, whether it's a fungible or a non-fungible token. There's certain requirements you have to use to mint, i.e. code and languages and things. And talk to us about how you've addressed the minting at scale problem, because essentially when you talk about Cardano as a financial operating system for the future, and understanding that EMEA and that kind of region of the world is a really part of your next 3 to 5 kind of go-to-market strategy, going where there's appetite for these efficiencies and not fighting the status quo of the West who doesn't know whether they need it yet or not, right? So outside of the regional thing, which we can talk about differently, but when we're really talking about we're talking about like everything can be a DID, right? Everything from the components of this and the end use of this to the person who buys it. like everybody becomes essentially tokenized and a container around their identity, their sovereign ID, which means the whole promise of tracking mangoes in Africa to Walmart in Kentucky, that we've heard the Hyperledger story about several thousand times. Really what you've enabled, unless I'm misconstruing it, is the ability to do that at scale without having to be able to write really complex code. Is that an accurate?
Yeah, you build these things in layers, and if you design them correctly, then what you can do is allow people to very easily build software that makes things turnkey. So, Mary is coming here, and we're initiating the HFC event on the 24th, unless there's a delay, in which case it'll be initiated on March 1st. But, the next week or so, it looks like, we turn it on. Well, who are the token issuers there? They're doing it from a command line, and there's some work there, but it's not so much that it can't be done by a reasonable person. The next generation of token issuers, cloud software, like a front-end interface on a website, right into the wallet itself, this type of stuff can easily be grafted on. And then you can have easy token builders. And they just call APIs, and they have some scripts in the background that run, and they make it easy where you just paint by numbers and enter in your monetary policy, and these types of things. And that's what eventually occurs. And so, what we're right now working on is like pre-existing projects. That's why we have the ERC20 converter, and we work with SingularityNet and, a litany of these other companies, because we want to take people who already have a token, already have a user base, already have a use and utility, and get them to come on Cardano, because it's the best way of acid testing what we've accomplished, what we've built with this standard. But, the minute you do that, you're going to have hundreds of people say, hey, me too, I want to do something here. And then that usability can easily be grafted on in the next 3 to 6 months, and you'll have hundreds of different ways of creating, retiring, burning tokens, and doing all kinds of clever monetary policy. And this is just the beginning of the multi-asset standard. It's versioned. And so throughout the years, we'll keep adding to it and keep, some features might be deprecated, other features may be enhanced. Like, for example, I'm really keen to look into KYC and AML, embedding DITs with transactions and wallets and tokens, so you can do security tokens, and you can be in full compliance with certain governments. So you can escalate the token to a point where it's in compliance. I'm also really big into concepts like contingent settlement, for example. And how that works is that Alice normally just pushes transactions to Bob. Like Bitcoin, you send a Bitcoin to somebody, but you may notice that people can send you Bitcoins without your consent. You might just, like, I've had public addresses before, and people have sent me stuff, and I just noticed on my copay wall, oh yeah, someone sent me something. Okay, cool. Well, anyway, with crypto, you can do contingent settlement if you're really clever about it, where people can only send something to you with your consent, and you can negotiate a transaction. Like, I'll donate to your organization if you sign this donation agreement. So you send out a transaction, it's pending, they have to sign a contract in order to have it clear. That's an example of a contingency. So these kinds of things will come later as usability comes, and then it's going to enable NFTs in new kinds of ways. It's going to enable finite tokens, which are only there for a brief period of time and they phase away. Maybe like Burning Man issues a token specific for that event. And so that's the Burning Man 2022 token, and you can only spend it during that time period, then it gets retired. These types of things will come.
Let's talk about that, because you're working in some third world governments, and you're doing some amazing things. The use case that just got announced this month was the tablets and Atala going into Ethiopia in a big way, with the elementary kind of programs. But it also seems to me that what you just said is a financial operating system for CBDCs at a maybe a second, third world scale, like a non-G7. But when you're talking about programmable finite tokens, you could have a CBDC that mints on this theoretically, and that is used as currency inside of a smaller country that goes, we want to pay our citizens.
God, yes. Yeah, let's talk about that.
And we want to pay our citizens, but we want this money to have velocity. We don't need it to be a store value. We don't want liquidity trap. So we're going to go Gestalt theory on them from the 1890s, but with programmable 3D money. And we're going to use Cardano as the operating system, because we can mint this. And now we can say on the 30th, it goes to zero, but you have $4,000. And so spend it. And then the velocity kicks in. And so a CBDC that kind of function as the currency that it's supposed to be, that doesn't compete with stores of value or other mechanisms, whether it be Bitcoin or what have you. So anyway, vamp on that a little bit, because that's what you're talking about.
There's so much cool stuff that you can do once you really start thinking about it. Like, for example, just tax compliance. So let's say you're Mauritius and you have a lot of problems ecologically. There's oil spills, there's a mass extinction of endemic species. So what you can do is say, okay, well, we'll create a CBDC. And when you're spending on things that are ecologically beneficial, there'll be no transaction fee. But if you're spending on things that are ecologically problematic, there'll be a transaction tax built right into the system. And then if you're foreign transactions, there's going to be a fee, and they get paid into a sovereign wealth fund for UBI and for ecological restoration. There you go. See, and to your point about money velocity, you're absolutely right. You can do money with expiry. It's super hard to do that, in a normal economy, because you have to reprint the money. Like, okay, we'll put Harriet Tubman on the 20. You can spend Tubman 20s for a year, and then after that, they're no longer legal tender. Well, that's super hard to do with paper money. Super easy to do with a token that's issued on a system. You just say, okay, well, the token is only valid for redemption to the primary currency for this period of time. So it's as good as $1 for a year. And at that point, it expires, unless you're a certain entity and maybe you can redeem it a little longer or something like that. So the musical chairs has to stop somewhere. But the point is that this type of experimentation, super hard to do in general, but in our system, super cheap, super easy to do once they get rolling. The same for voting. You can issue a vote token for an organization or a nation state and say, okay, if you register to vote, you get a vote token. And for the totality of the election, you have addresses, and you can just pick which one to send it to, and whoever has the most tokens wins. Basic, simple election for a club, for a corporation, for shareholder voting. Just give a dividend and a vote token to all your authenticated shareholders, this type of a deal. And that means you run elections at basically no cost, because if it costs you nothing to create a token or a loyalty point or whatever it is, and then it's just like a button click, and there you go, you're there. And you can also do things like, when you have a security, it's really hard to pay dividends to people. It's expensive. It's time consuming to let you. Well, here you just pay dividends to all the addresses the security tokens are at, and then you have an audit trail showing you've paid your dividend.
You mentioned Mauritius and ecological things. It's rules of space. I cross over a arbitrary line or opportunity zone track or special economic zone, and when I spend my CBDC, expiry, whatever, in that, the tax is X. And if I go over here, it's tax is Y. And I don't even have to know, because it geos me, and my DID allows me to own my encryption, allows me to own my data. So I'm not being, surveilled in a way that's kind of maybe the non-good side of this, right? Like social credit system. I have the benefits of a social credit system, but through a decentralized way, where a currency is flowing through at high velocity, incentivizing spending in the local markets or in the economic zones that I care about, right? The incentives are baked in. The actors are sovereign. The government can see what they need to see to make better decisions around road, whatever the things. I mean, this is all enabled by what you're talking about. And the ability to reduce the cost of, call it failure or I don't even call it failure, reduce the cost of experimentation.
That's right. The cost of experimentation. That's the key word there. And that's the power of our industry. Finance historically has only evolved in the years to decades. You have these huge events, big things like the Jamaica Treaty, or, Nixon getting us off the gold standard, or the Bretton Woods Accords, and then suddenly we can now do something new, or a major regulatory change, but we measure that in years to decades, and they're big events. Silicon Valley, cell phones, technology, it evolves every day. We're used to having the new iPhone. We're used to having the new operating system. We're used to having the new thing. We have that expectation. Well, when you open up finance to programmability and innovation, you will see every year thousands of new products, thousands of new ideas, and you'll see every year predictable evolution that is 100 times or 1,000 times faster than the systems of the past when you have that type of competition. Just like when the printing press came out. Then suddenly we went from a monk having to hand copy a book, making a book one of the most expensive things you could own, to the ability to mass manufacture information. Once you could mass manufacture information, you got newspapers. And then suddenly you had mass media for the first time ever, where you could have a whole society be on the same page about something. Never in human history had we had that. And that seems like antiquated and slow to us now, but that was a revolution back then. It was the same situation here. First time in human history, you can be your own bank. You can be your own identity. You can be your own financial service provider for your community. I was just talking to some people in the ISP business, and we were talking about micro ISPs, where they say the whole telco model is screwed up. You have to wait for a telco to show up, invest the time to build infrastructure in your neighborhood, and then they have to maintain that infrastructure. So I live in a farm just a little bit outside of Longmont. Longmont has a municipal ISP. They have fiber optic cable, fastest internet in the United States. Gigabit up, gigabit down, $40 a month. Wow. I am literally just about a half mile away from the edge of their fiber network. So there's no way to get access to it. No way to get access to it. So I just sit there and I have to use crappy, crummy 4G internet. Meanwhile, nearest neighbors are on this incredibly fast fiber optic. Well, what if I could be my own ISP? And I could make a deal, set up a micro ISP, build some local infrastructure, and then share all that fiber with my neighbors and franchise it from the municipal ISP. And there was a structure to do that and a predictable economic model for that. That would benefit me. I take care of that infrastructure, and it extends the parent company's business model out. That's the economy we're moving into, where everybody's working with each other. It's not an employer-employee. It's not a business-customer. We're all businesses and customers.
It's all peer-to-peer, and it's layered, and it's peer-to-peer, and there's a sovereign ownership at the most first-class citizen level, and yet there's a shared ownership of the infrastructure we all rely and leverage and use to go about our day. I think the endpoints in the next 3 to 5 years go from things like phone numbers and things like that to DIDs, probably on a towel, at least for a big part of the world, and that's when you think about endpoints, you need endpoints, but you don't really need the legacy infrastructure endpoints. Like, we're not using a phone number to talk to each other right now.
Right.
And so when we start to just wrap our head around simple use cases that we know and take for granted, we start to rethink what we actually need and get back to first principles. And anyway, we're always out of time. We never have enough time. This was a lot of fun. Parting words for those in the audience that are really looking to be the first mover, first user of that mass adoption scale of decentralized ID and all the different things that they can help enable that build out the ecosystem, and that are rapidly trying to consume and learn. Just words of wisdom or something from Charles that says, hey, a lot happened in 7 years or whatever it was. I guess 8 years now. A lot happened from the Charles Hoskinson who thought he was not a good entrepreneur to the guy who's sitting here today. What kind of parting for the folks? I mean,
it's a crazy ride, right? Broke to a billionaire in 8 years. It's unbelievable. Don't chase wealth, don't chase fame, chase passion, chase your ideas. What made me so successful was that there was a collection of things I was fanatically passionate about going and exploring and doing. And the infrastructure was built in just the right way to give me the opportunity to do that. Had I been born about 5 years earlier, I would have missed that window. 5 years later, it would have been a different infrastructure, so I have different passions. So find that passion, the thing that gets you up every single day and you're really fired about, and then understand that all the knowledge is there. You don't have to pay for it. It's there. Like, for example, you want to learn about cryptocurrencies, there's a great, amazing course on Bitcoin from Princeton University for free on Coursera. Go take that. It's great. And then there's a great series of lectures, 23 of them, from the chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, who's taught at MIT on cryptocurrency. Those two alone will make you more knowledgeable about crypto than 99% of the people on Earth. And then there's a dozen great books floating around. There's tutorials everywhere, and just play with things, tinker with things. But always tinker in a direction. People often ask me, how do you learn how to program? I say the worst way of learning how to program is buying a programming book and doing all the tutorials that you'll never get anywhere with it. The best way of learning how to program, start with a goal. Like, I want to build a web scraper so I can find my name. Anybody who mentioned me, so I can do reputation management and see what they're saying about me. Or I want to automate all my tweets for my Twitter account. Or I want to help with payroll, and I need to link these systems together and write some scripts to do that. Okay, you have a goal, you have an accomplishment. And when you go and do that, you have to learn so much to synthesize all of that, that by the time you get there, you now have programming skills. And you know you can accomplish stuff. So the next time something comes up, you say, how do I automate that? And then you go write another script. And every time you do, you get better at it. You gain more skills and so forth. Business works the exact same way. Entrepreneurship works the exact same way. You solve a problem, like the gal who started Bumble.
Yeah.
Dating apps sucked. So she's like, I want to solve dating for me. So I'm tired of this. And now she's a billionaire, because Bumble was a phenomenal idea. So it's the same situation here. Solve your problems or solve a personal itch. You'll build the skills, you'll build the knowledge, and you're passionate enough to survive the ups and downs for the entire process. Now, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't get lucky, but the worst case scenario is you keep the skills for life. You keep the resilience, you keep the knowledge, you keep the capabilities, and you have the knowledge that you can fail, get back up, and succeed. Part of my story was I failed twice in brutal ways. After I left Ethereum, there was so much bad blood in some of those people. I was tarred and feathered. No one would return phone calls for an entire year in the industry. And then after that, it took 2 years before people even talked about me again. And now it's like, oh, he's a big guy. It's like, no, believe me, there was a long time where I was just covered in tar. No one would want to associate with me. And so you have to have resilience in these things, and you have to understand the cost of resilience is that it takes years, a lot of beating, and there's no such thing as an overnight success. It's 10 years in the making, all overnight successes. And everybody pretends like they're instant.
Sometimes more, my friend. I'm a little older than you. I think it's exactly the kind of words to kick off day two. We're super excited to have you as a partner. SDK's 10, 20-year vision is just to really help drive the ecosystem on top of, build the rail cars on top of this amazing infrastructure alongside of you and others around it. And we're very grateful for, what you've sacrificed and the team has sacrificed to stay. And we've got your back. And we know that for the industry, you've got ours, at least that's our opinion, and we're sticking to it. And so thanks for kicking off day two so well. We're gonna get it underway here, but it's been an honor, man. Thanks. Good to see you again.
Cheers. This was so much fun, Chris. Until next time.
See you on the battlefield, buddy.
Absolutely.